the webinar by Bill Highway, part one of what we're doing as a little bit of a mini-series through the next couple of weeks, talking about chapter dashboards, specifically towards, obviously, component-based associations. So excited to have everybody here. We still got a bunch of people filling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So if I see a lot of new faces, or a lot of new names, I should say, in the webinar today. So first off, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. Over the last couple of months, Bill Highway has been making a big investment into educations specifically for component relations professionals in the nonprofit space. We realize that there's a gap in education and resources and tools that exists for CRPs, as we call them, and we really are hoping to add as much value as possible for you all. So very excited for you to be here. This is all about you. So please engage with us, ask questions, ask for resources, ask for links. The only reason we're doing this is to hopefully help you with whatever stage you are at in your CRP to continue to move forward. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, we did this a little bit differently. Today's only going to be 30 minutes. If you've attended before, they're typically a little bit longer. I will stay here as long as you would like after the 30 minutes to answer any questions you might have. So even put them in the middle of the presentation, and I'll make sure to address anything that I wasn't able to at the time at the end of the webinar. Also, we have gotten some feedback about making sure that our material is what we have called a little more meatier. So we're going to make sure that we're sharing the resources that we're using for all of this throughout the entire presentation. But real quick before I get started, I just want to make sure if you can type into the Q&A or the chat box, just type a Y for yes, an N for no. Can you hear me clearly, and can you see my screen? So before we get started, let's make sure all of the tech glitches are out of the way. All right, great. Lisa, Eric, Whitney, Brooke, Diana, Beth, Stacy, John. Well, we got a lot of great people in here today. Everyone says yes and yes, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So let me quickly go over the series overview. Today is part one. Next Wednesday at the same time is part two, and you guess it, the week after that, same time, Wednesday is part three. We're going to be talking about constructing and effectively utilizing chapter dashboards throughout your organization, and we got some really good tidbits to share on that today. So part one today is what's measured is real. So our learning objectives are going to be talking about aligning your organization, engaging to create and setting KPIs. Next week we're going to talk about it's great to set up a strategy for chapter dashboards, but how do we actually get the data? Because I'm sure a lot of you have issues collecting data, have gaps in data, and data integrity challenges throughout the organization when it comes to your chapters or components. And then part three is data utilization. So how to share and leverage data. And this is both at HQ and amongst your chapter leaders, all the way on down to your members. So putting your data to use, and we're going to be talking about one of the most important factors is keeping cadence. And that's going to be part three. So just to do a quick review on what we're going to be going over today. We're going to be discussing, and I have a load of information and resources to share beyond even just our presentation today. So look for those links. We're going to be dropping them in the chat box as we go. We'll also record this and send this out with all of the resources we're talking about to make life as easy as possible for you. But we're going to be talking and learning today about identifying key metrics. So the process for actually what are we measuring? Because I see a lot of associations and fraternities and sororities out there in the nonprofit space that when they don't have clarity on what to measure, they measure everything, and it becomes what we deem paralysis by analysis. We're going to talk about tracking metrics. So what are the top metrics to track? You're going to learn what some other successful associations with their chapters have tracked before and what kind of action that has created within the organization. And then communication and buy-in. So internal communication amongst your headquarters. You'll hear me call the components in your organization. whether that's your state associations or your local chapters or your divisions or your sections. I'll most likely refer to them as chapters, and the national office or international office, just for simplicity, as HQ. So the communication and buy-in amongst your staff at HQ, but then also your chapter leaders, and how do we utilize data to successfully roll out new projects along the way. All right, so for everybody who has not been on one before, one of these webinars, we welcome you. My name is Kyle Bazzi. I'm the Director of Growth and a proud Detroiter here at Bill Highway. Bill Highway is a tech solution that solves operational and admin and financial issues specifically for component-based organizations. We've been around since 1999, so we've seen just a ton of this stuff, and we're really excited that everybody wants to join us on just best practices and the things that we've learned from clients like you over the years. Okay, so there is the intro. Let's first and foremost talk about why dashboards. I know it might seem sort of obvious, but I find it very helpful to kind of review why we even put this together, because sometimes we take on a task that we just do it because we think we have to without really thinking what the purpose is. So first off is specific for you as CRPs, where this becomes really powerful is when we're talking about project buy-in from HQ and chapters. Type into the chat for me, and I've asked this question plenty before. How many of you have been asked at HQ, are chapters really working? Or maybe you've been asked, are they even worth it? Should we even keep chapters if you're in the association space? And then chapters. So if you've rolled things out, or let's say you've taken over this position, and the team before you at HQ has tried to roll projects out to chapters, and it's not gone well, and those relationships have been burnt to some extent. What about budget allocation? So it's rounding the end of the year, so I'm guessing if your fiscal year is on the calendar year, that you've been setting budgets with your senior leadership. Well, we're going to be talking about an example today that we've done a case study webinar with, where we can actually get more budget because the numbers we've used in the past have proven out to be true. And then we're going to share some examples today about incentives and support. So let's find the right stuff to measure, and then let's use that data to influence in a positive way, in a appropriate way, but to influence behavior. And then best practices. When you measure things, when we analyze that data, over time it tells a story, and we learn best practices from different chapters that are doing things just extraordinary, and we also learn of initiatives that have a high probability of failing. So we'll talk about best practices. All right, so I'm going to have my colleagues here in the webinar with me go ahead and share this link. This is a resource I'll be talking about a bit about today from the Mariner Management and Marketing Consulting Company, Peter and Peggy. And they have a chapter performance metrics sample. So we're going to share this sample with you. We're going to dive deeper into it later, but you can see what we're going to be talking about today. So if you want to kind of envision what a dashboard looks like, there are a bunch of different variations. But we're going to be talking about the different types of buckets here that you can measure, as well as how do we quantifiably look at it as either binary, it either got done or it didn't get done, is something you can track. Or we're looking at numbers and we have buckets of needs improvement on this column, sustaining, so it's okay, or high performing. So we're going to go ahead and share that example right now with everybody in the chat. So go ahead and grab that link and you can open it up in another window. And lastly, here's what I want to share with you, because I'm hoping that you already have achieved this level of success or you are on your way there. And I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine that you just we fast forward a year and it's November 2017. I want you to imagine that you've increased your membership by 24% with the projects that you rolled out. I want you to imagine that increased retention. I want you to imagine that you increased membership by 38%. I want you to imagine that you've doubled membership in a good amount of your chapters in the past year. I want you to imagine that you've had a substantial increase. Let's call it $300,000 if that's substantial to your organization. Increase in sponsorship revenue. And then I also want you to imagine that you've rolled out programs to increase other non-dues revenue such as things like product sales, or maybe it's education, or maybe it's certifications. Now this is a real example you're looking at, and you're going to hear me talk about this throughout the webinar. This was Dresden at COSIN, the Consortium of School Networkers, and we did a webinar with her in the past month talking about what she did to achieve this. Well, one of the biggest tools that she talked about in her arsenal was the chapter dashboards and how she utilized that to get things done. So I want you to keep this in mind, and I also want you to do something. I don't know if you're one of those people like me that has a vision board, but I want you to write the numbers down on your vision board, even just a sticky note, and put them on your computer. What do you want to achieve with what we're going to be doing? What does that look like? And it's going to be different for everybody. Somebody that I have just a high level of admiration for and learned a ton from reading, Peter Drucker talks about what gets measured gets managed. So I want you to accept a mantra that if you roll out projects or initiatives, whether that's internally at your office or with your chapters, what gets measured gets managed, okay? Part 3 we'll be talking about the cadence of measuring, but what gets measured gets managed. So as we roll out new projects, we have to find ways to appropriately measure those projects. All right, so learning objective number 1, and write these things down. It helps them sink in. Number 1 is aligning your organization. So go ahead and feel free to type into your chat right now, because it will help with teasing out some questions. What are the strategic objectives at your headquarters? Either you're in the middle of a 5-year strategic objective period or you're setting new ones. What are your strategic objectives right now? And I don't want you to look them up. I want you to be able to tell me what your strategic objectives are without having to research them on the website. So answer this for me. What does your leadership team value? Okay? What does your leadership, I want you to analyze your senior leadership team, whether that's you're a smaller organization, it's just the executive director or CEO, or maybe it's a broader team that you're presenting to when you want to roll out a new project or get additional budget, or, you know, God forbid, ask them for a new team member because you're growing. All right, what does your leadership value? What are they measuring? What are they measuring? So I know some of it is obviously going to be related to the strategic objectives, but what are they measuring? Do you know? Have you asked? Don't assume. Have you asked what the leadership team is measuring? And then what are they investing in? So this is where, as it's just CRPs here in this webinar, are they saying, here's our strategic objectives and this is what we're measuring, yet they invest in something that doesn't make sense in that light? I want you to analyze that. What are they actually investing in? What are they saying, and what are those actions? Okay? And then that's the HQ, strategic objectives. I know there's a lot of organizations in this webinar that their chapters are very autonomous from HQ. So the question I have for you then is, what are your chapters' strategic objectives? Right? So have you engaged them and understood or surveyed them to understand what their strategic objectives are? And then find those overlaps, you know, find where we can get started and what's going to be easy because everybody's already on the same page. And we'll be a change agent for maybe some of those other things later on down the road. So that's where you get started. Let's take the temperature of the organization and let's see where we're at right now, all right? So we got a bunch of answers coming into the chat right now, which is great. We're going to go over those in just a few minutes. So I also want you to ask the question, what support do the chapters want from you in headquarters? And I know if you're like most CRPs, you have this spectrum of chapter leaders, most of which are volunteers, and they're going to be some of your troublemakers that you just can never seem to get along with or align with, and then there's going to be the ones that are your early adopters. They're pushing you. They want more support from HQ. We'll talk about getting started with those early adopters and the working group. So here's something that I do. I obviously I can't require you to write this down, but I really wish you would. I want you to understand that as a CRP, and I'm sure I'm talking to a wide range of experience, but I'm sure if you're more experienced that you would agree with this. Everything that you're doing has to start with your chapters. So even if HQ needs you to get something done, maybe your executives are pushing on you for a new metric or to increase membership or to validate the chapter model you're currently in. But it's got to start with your chapters. Projects will die when the thought process and the mindset is the foundation's laid with what HQ needs. It starts with your chapters. You need to be genuine. It needs to genuinely start with your chapters. Don't engage with them and then just toss aside their feedback. We're going to use their feedback not only for the chapter dashboard, but also to tell a story at national. And then be present. So when I see really successful projects rolled out by CRPs and the CRPs that have done just some amazing things, what I see is the chapter feedback from the leaders and the volunteers are, I'm so thankful that so-and-so has just been so present with us, whether that's the monthly call, whether that's making time in their busy schedule to do a one-on-one with me, et cetera, et cetera. So start with chapters, be genuine, be present. All right, so let's give an example of this. Let's not just talk about it, let's give an example. So an example might be an increased engagement of membership. You know, we do our homework in the association space, and we've looked up a lot of strategic plans, and we know that this is a big one, increasing engagement of membership. Well, do you know that we did a webinar with FEI recently, and when they surveyed their members, 86%, this is a crazy high number, 86% of respondents said that local or chapter and local peer networking is their primary reason for belonging to FEI. So the outcome, finding new ways to provide additional support to chapters for that is apparent. You also know that the chapter leaders are going to be on board because that's what their members love about the membership. But then let's say you need investment or you need resources or you just need to get this on the project roadmap with your HQ senior leadership. Well, with this kind of data, this kind of research from the survey, you bet that FEI got the buy-in to be able to invest into peer networking. So when we're talking about strategic objectives, if one is to increase engagement and membership, let's survey our members and survey our chapter leaders and also gauge the interest at HQ. What does that mean and how can we align to that? This quickly was something that FEI was able to jump on and increase membership and also make life a lot better for the chapter leaders. All right, so an informal poll question that I'd love to hear from everybody. Have you sat down with your board or leadership to determine your KPIs? And KPIs are key performance indicators. So just type a Y or N into the chat box. Have you sat down with your board or leadership to determine your KPIs? And I'll take it one step further. Have you done it in the past year? Have you done it in the past year? All right, I got a yes, a no, a yes, a no, a no. Lisa, Diana, Asha, I think it is. Beth, Stacy, Whitney. Okay, great. So step 2 in the second part of this learning objective is to engage to create. Okay, this is something that I call getting outside your 4 walls. You can't find the answers where you're sitting. We need the information from the different stakeholders in the organization. So I'm going to go back to that example where we said, imagine this, and you look through all those stats, right? And I'm sure that most of us would be salivating over that kind of growth, and not even just that kind of growth, that kind of increase in retention. 3 percentage points in increased retention far outweighs, over the long run, 10% of new membership growth. Because if you got a leaky bucket, filling it up every year with the increasing number of people becomes an impossible task. So how did Dresden from COSIN start tracking? So I loved her approach, and she talked about it with us in the webinar, and she got down and dirty. She rolled up her sleeves, and by the way, she had no budget, and she had no staff. So this was just her. So the good news is it's possible. Now, Dresden is a total rock star, but you guys are too. It's just equipping yourself with the tools. So she did face-to-face. Maybe it's at the conventions or the conferences you're holding. Maybe it's about the ability to travel. Maybe you don't have a travel budget, so you need to just meet the local components that you can drive to. Getting that kind of interaction with your chapter leaders is incredibly important. And then 2-way communication with leaders. So it's an open dialogue. It isn't just Dresden to them. It is both ways. What are their ideas? What's important to them? What do they want help with? This is how we're going to form and gather the information for where to start with our chapter dashboard. Because you can't just take somebody else's dashboard. They're in a different spot with their association or sorority or fraternity. You need to take a picture and gauge the interest of your organization to see where do we have common interest between the key stakeholders that aligns with our strategic objectives that we can start with. And then she went through the process, and I know this is going to be different for every organization, but she then set those expectations about what's to come. Hey, we're going to start working on providing these resources to you as chapter leaders. But understand, as a CRP at HQ, here are my challenges. Getting everybody on board. Getting adoption from different kinds of chapters that don't want to work with national or perhaps have been burned by national in the past. Sharing those challenges, I can assure you in the right way, sharing them in the right way, will form stronger bonds amongst those early adopters that we're going to use for pilots to show value with new project rollouts. But then you need to hold them to those standards, and Dresden actually got it to the point where she was able to rewrite the bylaws. We have an amazing case study webinar coming up in January with Gary LeBranch at ACG, where he's going to be talking about what they did with their bylaw changes. But she was able to rewrite the bylaws or the affiliation agreements, setting expectations for those roles. All right, I'm going to jump over to something real quick. All right, I want to make sure everyone can see this. So this is something that actually at Bill Highway, but I know of other organizations that do it as well, called the report card. And this is something, so when we talk about telling a story with data, you got to put it into a format that is going to visually appeal to what we're trying to get done. So this report card, and we'll send this out, it's just an example, is about putting the data that matters to people, both at HQ and at the chapter level, and then sharing that, sharing it and showing the high performers, showing the improvement opportunities, showing the averages, showing where there's areas of opportunity to increase revenue or increase engagement. Sharing this in a way, when you call it a report card, it gives it this connotation of how people are going to review it. So get creative with the way that you're visually displaying this stuff, and you're also sharing with them. Okay, so this is a resource that we will send out with the recording of this presentation. But what I want you to write down is ask yourself this question: are you presenting the data in a visually appealing way? Okay, the information you might be communicating might be falling on deaf ears because of the way that you are doing it. All right, and then another one is this incentive. So I want to take a second and go over this. So this is something we found with the Military Officers Association. And this is a really, really cool tool. And I really love their website as well. So they have a really great section on chapters. But this was a tool that they used as an incentive. So they're obviously tracking all this data. And then you can see that they have chapter categories in this column, chapter code, the chapter name, and then they have this, the chapter members added over a given time period, and the incentive qualified. So they have this for different categories across their chapters, but they use this as a tool to incentivize their chapter leaders to hit certain metrics. This is one way of taking a specific metric and exploiting it to influence that behavior. It's a very, very good metric to obviously measure here too. But that doesn't mean it's right for you. You got to find what's right for you. But this is another tool, and if my team can drop that link into the chat so everybody can take a look at that one from the Military Officers Association. All right, let's jump back over to this presentation here. And let's talk about best practices. So there is this this natural bell curve, and I think just in all of life and in different areas. But the difference between support and incentivizing, and then identify and replicate. We want to live in the sweet spot with our best practices. So some of the stuff we're going to be sharing in just a second goes along with that. All right, second and last poll question here is what are the top metrics that you measure, if any? What are the top metrics that you are measuring, if any? Now, I'm not going to call anybody out by their first and last name and organization, so don't worry about that. But if you're not measuring anything, I want you to be honest. Because if you're not honest with it, then it will, if you can't identify the problem, we'll never find the solution. But what are the top metrics you are measuring, if any? And then I want you to tell me something. How confident that are you in those metrics? Are you sure they're the right ones? What have you seen inside your organization, inside your nonprofit, that has resulted in you measuring those metrics? If the answer is nothing, then we might want to reevaluate it. And here's why. So setting KPIs should typically fall under 4 different categories: membership, financial, activity, and perceptions. Okay? Membership, financial, activity, and perceptions. Now, on the right, you see this diagram. Okay? And I always love the MBA diagrams. Nothing against MBAs, obviously, but we got to make sure we understand it. So they need to be, the sweet spot is right here in the middle. They need to be actionable. They need to be easily interpreted. Okay? If somebody reads, I want you to, when you display your dashboards and your metrics, just hand them to somebody and listen. Don't say anything. What did they say? Did they get it right away? Or did they say, well, I don't understand what this metric means? Or I don't understand what this graph is trying to show? Okay? The third one is accessible. How do they get to those? You saw that I was able to go to the Military's Officers Association and just access that sheet, right? It's highly accessible, okay? Now, I don't know their process in sending it out or not, but it was highly accessible. And then understandable, okay? And so the difference between understandable and interpretation, can they easily understand it? And then interpretation is taking what they understood and turning it into action, okay? So that sweet spot is right there in the middle, all right? Okay, so let's take a look at the Mariner Management dashboard again. So if you got it pulled up, go ahead and pull it up. I'm going to pop it up on my screen as well. We'll see what they got here. So the different categories they have are member engagement and services. They have leadership, so an activity, communications, and then organization. Now, some of it, you see they have need improvement, sustaining, and high performing, okay? And so you can set the expectations of what high performing actually means, again, with incentives or just a shareable dashboard within your organization. We're going to be talking about this next week, the optimum reporting method, okay? So how do you actually collect that data, because it's a whole another beast to tackle. But this is a really great example of a setup that and sample that you could start with your chapter performance metrics. Now, what I would fill in here, right? What I would fill in here is the stuff that matters to your organization is aligned with your strategic objectives, and also things that you perhaps just need to get activity on. So maybe you need everybody to file taxes, or you need to see what they filed as their taxes. You put that on the dashboard, and we can incentivize that in different ways, and that's a certain type of activity. All right, I know we only got a couple minutes left here. This is a really important topic, okay? And this is the difference between leading versus lagging KPIs. How many of you have heard the term leading and lagging KPIs? I'm sure most of us have heard of KPIs. So what is a leading KPI? It's typically an output-oriented, easy to measure, but hard to improve or influence, allows you to track how things are going, precursor to direction of something related to staff volunteer activities, and can change quickly, okay? Lagging is, and actually we got these switched. So these leading and lagging should be switched here. So this is a leading KPI. It's typically input-oriented, hard to measure and easy to influence, backward-focused or trailing, typically financial indicators such as revenue, profit, cost, etc. So switch those, okay? And we're going to be talking about that in a second. Now, I want you to start identifying what a lead KPI is and what a lag KPI is, all right? So think of a lead KPI as a lever, all right? And when I say a lever, if you need to improve revenue or membership retention, That is a lagging KPI. I can't touch it. But there are things that I can do, the inputs, the lead KPIs, that I can pull to make a difference. So if you're measuring, let's say, that via or through your data analysis, you've learned that if chapters throw 2 events per quarter, that their retention on average increases to 90%. Well, then that event each quarter is a leading KPI. It's an indicator, all right, that you can measure to create an outcome, all right? And so that's how you want to think about it. You want to have those lead KPIs in your dashboard. If you're looking at your dashboard right now and the metrics are all revenue, membership growth, engagement, retention, those are all measurable lagging KPIs. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that you need to take it one step further to find the leading KPIs for your chapter leaders. Those are the things that they can actually do to influence the outcome for the goals that you are measuring, okay? So if you're not measuring very good lead KPIs, you're not giving the tools to chapter leaders that they need to align themselves with HQ, okay? So what are your leading KPIs, all right? We see that a lot of people get the lagging KPIs very easily, but it's not easy to identify the correct leading KPIs. That takes more work, but the investment in it is well worth it. So here are some of the top metrics that we see here at Bill Highway, in that we see are measured across, we actually have over 3,500 chapters across dozens and dozens of national headquarters. Total chapter percentage, so total percentage of chapter revenue versus overall, the average age of your members year over year, turnover, so new member turnover, membership, so your total membership count, reasons for contact, how many times you've engaged with them, category, so revenue by each thing that your members are purchasing, and then the accounts receivable aging. These are all examples of lagging, okay? Now you need to analyze this and find out that the crossover between your new member turnover, okay, and the reasons for contacting them. And you need to find the chapters that are doing it really, really well, and then see if you can replicate that across your chapters. And then take the leading KPI and measure that. Measure the input from your chapter leaders. If my team can drop that PDF into the chat for everybody to take a look at, that would be great. Okay, so it is 12:32 here Eastern. We want to make sure that we're as efficient as possible with your time. So now we're at the point of the presentation where I'm going to go over a bunch of resources that are available there out for you. But at this time, if you want to start asking some questions, we're going to get to those as well. All right, so on the screen, if you want to get really fancy, and it makes sense to be able to do this visually, but there's some really great tools, and these are paid tools that are out there, like New Relic, Tableau, Domo, iDashboards, Broadpoint, Clipfolio. I've actually, over the past 7 years in startups, have used all except for iDashboards. So they all have their pros and cons, but here are some dashboards you can use. I would say if you're just getting started, and especially if you don't have any budget, just start with something very simple like a spreadsheet or Google spreadsheets, which actually can make it a lot easier to keep updated. Keep it very simple. The good thing about Google spreadsheets is you can use Google Forms to send out to your chapter leaders if you don't have access to data. And when they put the data into those forms, it automatically populates your spreadsheets. And then you can have graphs that are also pre-populated by the spreadsheet. So you can automate a little bit of it. And obviously it's completely free. But if you want to get fancy, here are some really great examples that you can take it a step further to visually display your data to tell a story. All right, so my team, as I'm going through this, please drop these links into the chat for every slide that I go over. Marketing General Incorporated is a really great company, and they share a bunch of white papers and resources out there as well that measures and has some dashboard examples out there too. So we're going to share those with you. This is an example of something that they've shared, and you could replicate in a spreadsheet to measure. Another one, Association XYZ here for the performance dashboard, is on Envera. So they have, this is a different way of looking at it, and looking at it geographically. So I had a great conversation with somebody recently that had, under their under their control a little over 120 chapters. And what they found was 50 years ago, 20 to 50 years ago, when the membership was booming, the golden years as they called it was different geographies that really made sense. Now, as the world has progressed and certain things have changed, i.e. the baby boomer generation moved out of the cities into the rural areas, and now you have the millennial and Gen Xers that want a more urban setting. Their geography landscape of chapters has changed. So they actually found a really good dashboard to actually measure things by region, and that is an analysis that proved very useful for them. So we'll share that out for you as well. Here's a kind of a part 2 of it, and you'll see that they had operations, membership, retention, some of the different things that they measured. This one looks like they had more control at national because they could actually measure current pipeline, so what's been maybe invoiced by region, what's been collected, so on and so forth. Here are some other examples. So when you think about those, the products that you're selling, the membership, the events, the e-commerce, the certifications, so on and so forth, being able to measure those as an aggregate and kind of seeing growth, can be very important as well when you're telling a story about why you need budget or how this project that you just did. Remember, we fast forwarded to 2017 at this time in November, that you have created XYZ of value. You've seen revenue increase by this percent over the course of that year. And we'll also share this out too. So what I like about this dashboard is the green, yellow, red, and the arrows. So where's it trending, right? Where's it trending? Does it fit my thresholds? So even though this one's trending up, it still hasn't crossed a threshold where I feel good about it, right? Or maybe it's going in the wrong direction, for what I'm looking at. Again, this is a simple and very interpretable visualization of the data for the dashboards, okay? All right, so just to recap, the number one thing that you need to do is take the temperature of your organization. Know what is important with your headquarters as well as your chapter leaders. Strategic alignment amongst them, and then communication is so important. And then this is something we're going to harp on more in part 2 next week when we're talking about collection of data. Low-hanging fruit. KISS, keep it simple. Don't start, just because headquarters wants to measure something, if it's not aligned with the chapters, I understand that you might have to do it, but I want you to understand that there's going to be a rub. There's going to be friction with it. Go with what's easy. What do the chapter leaders want from national? Well, let's turn that into some kind of leading indicator, leading KPI that will match to a lagging KPI. But at least we're all on the same page because that's something they want too. That's what we call low-hanging fruit. And then start small, okay? Start small. Tackle a couple or a few KPIs to start. Don't try to roll out this comprehensive 11-page plan of all these dashboards and metrics. You want to start small because nobody gets it right the first time. Nobody. Even if you've done it before and you're at a new organization, it's different. There's different inputs and variables at the new organization. So do yourself a favor and start small and consumable and then build it from there. Okay, I promise this thing will build out over time, and it'll also be easier to get people to interact and interpret things when there's less work to do, especially with our volunteers. And then the top 10% and the bottom 10%. So to avoid paralysis by analysis, to avoid just seizing up every time you think about looking at this mountain of data, look at the top 10% and the bottom 10%. Those outliers are the ones that are going to tell stories, okay? Best practices at the top 10% and things to avoid at the bottom 10%. So look at the extremes. All right, so go ahead and start rolling in your questions. I'm going to keep this slide up here for now. This is what's up next. So again, we have part 2 of the chapter dashboards next week, Wednesday, November 9th. Part 3 on Wednesday, November 16th. We're going to talk about next week about how do we actually get a hold of all this data. So we're going to talk about some really good processes and things to move to. And then the week after that, we're really going to dive into a lot of great examples. We kind of scratched the surface with the military officers today with incentives and leveraging and sharing your data. Okay? So we'll send out those links. And team, if you can drop those links into the chat so people can sign up for those if they haven't already. All right, so that is officially the end of the webinar. We took your feedback and we tried to compact more information, more resources into 30 minutes. I know we went a little over. And also make it much meatier for everybody to ask questions on. Because I know that asking for an hour of everyone's time is really hard. So I hope that was useful. Lisa, I'm 100% talking to you because you gave us some amazing feedback last week. So we really do appreciate it. And I want you to know that we're learning here too. So we love the input. Okay, so let's get some questions knocked out of the way. All right. Yeah, Stacy asked, can we also get the link, the PDF link for the examples of lagging versus leading KPIs? Yes, we will definitely send that out, Stacy, and make sure you have it. Stacy also asked, other ideas for incentives. So Stacy, this is a great question, and if you could answer a follow-up one for me. And Lisa, we will send the sample links with the webinar recording. Stacy, what are your strategic objectives right now at National or HQ and your chapters? So before we get into incentives, we need to analyze what matters to the organization. So if we go back to that engagement one, okay, I want you to think about, okay, we need to increase membership engagement at our local components, our local chapters. And then I want you to write down, and this is, again, just walking through an example, write down all the different types of engagement, because there's a bunch of different types. We saw one organization that needed to increase retention with their members, and they found through analyzing their data that a couple of chapters were doing an amazing job. They were top 10%. And what they were doing was they were calling their members with X amount of days before renewal, okay? And that right there increased retention, or it was a crazy number, like 40-some% of them would renew, and that increased retention. So they took that and they incentivized it. If they could report that their other chapters would start making calls, maybe they got a bigger rebate from National. Maybe National gave them a discount on what was owed to the headquarters. Maybe they paid for some kind of admin work for them. There's different incentives, all the way down to even just saying, hey, these are volunteers, and maybe it's Starbucks gift cards for the chapters that start doing this, or it's Starbucks gift cards for the ones that can get it over XYZ. There's a bunch of different ways that you can incentivize for it once you identify what you need to incentivize for. So, Stacey, you said increase of chapter members, increase of HQ chapter members, and numbers of individuals who attend each chapter's annual educational meeting. Also about to add the number of countries working with as possible in the chapters. Great. So going global is another really big topic that we will definitely explore. But Stacey, here's what I would do. I would, first off, either analyze the data that you have or survey the chapters and even the members on why do they attend the annual educational meeting. Let's understand who they are and why they're attending the annual educational meeting. And then from that data, what can we surmise as the top reasons? And then take those top reasons and how do we turn them into leading KPIs for the chapter leaders, okay? I think that's where I would start. And so if we can boil it down to that, then we can look at and survey your chapter leaders now and ask maybe a broad survey to everybody, what kind of incentives, and maybe we give some examples from other associations or fraternities or sororities, that what incentives would motivate them, all right? Simply ask that question. And then, Stacey, I'm going to guess that you have already identified some chapter leaders that are your early adopters. They're the ones that you can get on the phone with, you have a good relationship with, they don't hate headquarters or look at it like a civil war. And I would call them as well, and I would ask them about the incentives too. So, hey, I would there's a really great saying that we talked about, and it's the 3 steps to leadership. You know what the first step of leadership is? Defining reality. The last step is always to express gratitude, right? Saying thank you. That middle step, so that's the first and last step. The middle step is always to serve the ones you lead. That's the 3 steps to great leadership, right? But that first step, defining reality. So get on the phone with these people, or when you send out the survey to your chapter leaders, and define reality. Hey, we need to increase the number of chapter members, and we need to increase the number of members coming to the educational meeting. All right? You're defining that reality for them. Why are you sending this out? And then walk through what are some things that would make it easier for them. How could HQ incentivize you as a chapter president or treasurer or officer or admin? How can we incentivize you to increase these statistics at your own chapter? Okay? And then I think what you'll get out of that, you'll be able to turn into some actionable insight. And then again, you need to measure it. You need to make it actionable. You need to make it interpretable. You need to make it understandable. Great question, Stacy. I would love to learn more about what you got going on as a project, because it sounds like you're really onto something. All right, John asks, can the same KPIs be used for multiple chapter models? Or would you have different dashboards and KPIs for the different models? So John, I'm going to go and attempt to answer this question, but if you could perhaps explain to me maybe just high level what those different chapter models are. I'll give you an example, one that we have seen though. So we have a client in the association space that has over 700 chapters, and they have these different ends of the spectrum. So very large association chapters that have their own staff. They have over 1,000 members alone, and they operate very independently. They don't need a lot of support because they have enough of the funds to pay for this stuff. And then they have a majority of their chapters that are smaller, ran by volunteers in their quote-unquote spare time. And the volunteers are just swamped. And so they need a lot more support from national. So those are 2 different models in terms of operations that I see. I think that this is a great question. You can, kind of the 80-20 rule. I think 80% of it is still going to be able to remain the same. But you might have different iterations of that for the different models inside your organization. I think that when we looked at the military officers example, you could see the different categories that they had. So they bucketed these categories to apply to the different different chapters they had in the organization. I think that was one really smart way that they used a metric from the dashboard to incentivize behavior. So that's kind of how I would take a look at it. So John, you did answer. You said, for example, a networking model chapter may only have networking events, while a large chapter may do that, but also put on educational events and supply communications on important law changes and other support related to the professional. Great question. Yeah, and so and you just said, John, thanks for the engagement clarification on the activity KPI. But I would look at that, and so that's really great. And first off, kudos to you for having the different layers of chapters, because we have a lot of associations asking us right now, how do we start with a lightweight chapter, right? And that's what I'm guessing you're calling the networking model chapter, which is great. But that's what I would measure them on, and I absolutely would do that. And then I don't know if a networking model chapter can get to maybe the size where they become a full chapter, but I think by making the entire dashboard accessible and then maybe just color coding it to show which applies to whom might really benefit you in kind of segmenting that. But I think access to everybody is really important, because it could also show that the networking chapter could elevate to a full-time chapter. All right. Wow, we got a ton of great engagement this time. So let me see if I missed any. So any other questions that are out there? I'm combing through the chats. There's a lot of them. Let me find a couple right here. So Max is showing me one right now. Which one is it? So are there any key KPIs that we should be suggesting to our leadership teams? And that comes from Scott. Yeah, Scott, that's a great question, and there definitely are. So again, it goes back to those strategic objectives. So there's two types of executive teams or leadership teams or whatever your structure is. And this goes for boards as well. So this might be your staff, senior leadership team. And then as an extension, you know that there's got to be some kind of board buy-in. And I'm talking about the board for HQ. First and foremost, identify the personalities that you have in the organization. Do your executives or senior leadership, are they assertive and knowledgeable around what we're talking about? So I've worked for people where they've came to me and said X, Y, Z, or they were very thoughtful about the things that we were measuring together, and it was a very collaborative approach. Or the other side of it is, once a year they're measuring how you're performing as an individual inside the organization, or maybe it's more frequent. But it's very hard to get on the same page with them because they don't give you a lot of information of what to measure in the meantime. First off, if you're in the second example, take the active approach to put something together on an organization. Just because they're not asking for it does not mean you don't give it. That's super important. And also, don't just measure this. And we're going to be talking about this in part 3. Don't just measure things annually with them or quarterly with them. You should be using this as a tool to communicate either opportunistically. Maybe you just had a really big breakthrough, and although you don't have your review with them for another month, you send it over to them, or send it over to the white knight that you seem to work really well with on the senior leadership team. So that's really important. But then how do you identify KPIs with them is, first off, and it sounds simple, but literally sometimes it's just asking, okay? And then in asking in the sense that, hey, here's our strategic objectives. Do you guys have some ideas on the things that you would like to see measured in order for us to, kind of get a check-in cadence, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, to see how we're doing in staying aligned to those throughout the year? Now, if you don't get really good answers from that, the next step I would take is putting some of them together. The big hitters are always, those lagging indicators like revenue and membership engagement and, so on and so forth, retention. Those are kind of a given that we need to track those. But what I want you to identify, and I think something that your senior leadership team will find a lot of value out of, is the leading KPIs. Okay, so what levers have we incentivized the chapters to pull that have resulted into those lagging KPIs? I think when you find that, that's the bridge that senior leadership looks at you as a CRP and goes, whoa, that was awesome. And so the next time you want to roll out a project, right, let's say you want to roll out community software, and that's actually what Dresden's doing next in the COSIN example, she now has the attention of senior leadership with, guess what, staff members that they've given her, and guess what, budget that they've given her. Because she said, this is another leading in KPI. If we can get engagement via this community software. The chapters have asked for it, either by name or kind of explaining what their challenges are or opportunities. And it's resulted in what she's deemed as chapter software or community software. Okay? And now that's going to be another KPI, leading KPI. How can we get our members engaged at our chapters, communities digitally, right? And using that to show increase in retention, increase in membership, so on and so forth. So really identifying the leading KPIs. Now those aren't something that, without knowing an organization, we can just start spouting off for people. That's something that takes time to develop. But again, it will come out of the conversations. Scott, let me know if that answered your question. All right, so we got one other one from Stacy here, I believe. So increase of chapter members, increase of HQ chapter members. No, we already reviewed this, Max. So we got that reviewed for Stacy. Okay, great, Scott. Yeah, it's those leading KPIs. I'll give you an example, and I will be completely upfront with everybody. So obviously, Bill Highway is a for-profit technology company. We've been working in the nonprofit space for 17 years. But what we found was the best way to engage people like you was webinars. It took us 8 months to find a really good mode of communication where we can engage with CRPs and learn from CRPs about what we should be innovating and building next. But now these webinars are a leading KPI because we can run another webinar. That's something we can come in tomorrow and can control. Now the outcome from that is what the company's been measuring for years, but it's really identifying and boiling down to the leading KPI. And these webinars were something that adds a lot of value to our members, which are all of you, our attendees, that we have found and have just been given incredible feedback on what we're doing. And loving that we're investing our own dollars into making this happen. And at the same time, so we're adding that value and getting the desired outcome. So think about that inside your association or sorority or fraternity. What's the desired outcome that you want? You already know that. What is the leading activity, that leading KPI that will deliver the results that you're looking for? Really boiling it down to that. All right. So we're getting to the top of the hour here. We do have a couple more questions that I think we'll answer offline for everybody. But I want to thank everyone for showing up. We still got a ton of people in here, which is great to see. I hope this added value. If it did or it didn't, please let us know. So respond to the email we sent to you with the recording and just say 3 bullet points. We don't need the niceties. Be candid with us. What do you enjoy and what can we improve in these webinars to better help and educate you with the projects you guys are working on as CRPs? Your guys' jobs are incredibly tough because you're often fighting what we've been told is called a civil war between the components and HQ. And they're all looking at you to get things done, and that can be incredibly frustrating. But if there's things that we can continue to share, even assessments. So one of the things we've been doing is these knowledge shares. And if you want to sign up for one, you can go to billhighway.co/expert-chat, and we'll actually just sit down with you and hand you a packet based on the project you're working on of all the resources that we have seen and been able to collect between us. And we have some really great partners that consult with the CRPs for projects. And we collect a lot of information from them as well. So let us know what those things are. We look forward to seeing everybody in part 2 next week and continue conversation about collecting data and what that looks like and the struggles that exist when, hey, I'd love to learn how many members are attending events, but we don't have any access to that data. So how the heck do we get it? We're going to be talking about that next week. All right, everybody. If you want to send me in some of your playlists so we can get some jams going at the beginning of the next webinar, we'll have a little bit of fun with it too. Besides that, if you are a Cubs fan, go Cubbies. If you are an Indians fan, I'm not sure that we're going to be the closest of friends, as I am a Detroit Tigers fan, and we're not on great terms right now. Or if you are following the politics and it's driving you as crazy as it's driving us over here, by this time next week, it will be over. Well, I guess we hope it will be over by this time next week. Until then, this is Kyle from Bill Highway signing off. Thanks again for joining. Have a great rest of your hump day.